What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into MLS Digest. We're here to preview the MLS Cup Playoff quarterfinals or the Conference Semifinals with just 8 teams remaining. We've had a 2-week break since the best of 3 round 1 matchups finished due to the timing of the international break, but we're ready to get back going now, and I would say the 8 remaining certainly deserve to be here, and we have some really intriguing matchups in each conference, with all of the top 4 seeds besides Charlotte remaining, NYCFC being the only upset in the first round. And we have so much left to go with so many storylines and so many stars left to prove their marks. And those quarterfinals will get going this weekend, November 22nd to the 24th. We got 1 game on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and then the final one on Monday. So make sure to like this video down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new here and enjoy the MLS content and are keeping up with the playoffs. And let's just get right into everything you need to know and all the info and my predictions for these MLS playoff matchups. So the first matchup we have is between the Whitecaps and LAFC, the 2 versus 3 seed. And great news for the Whitecaps because they're getting 2 really important players back that basically puts them at full strength. They got Brian White and Blackman, the striker and center back, and especially Brian White being that guy up top all season long and for so many years in Vancouver. That is really, really great news for this matchup that historically and especially recently has not gone Vancouver's way, especially in the playoffs. The last 2 years they've met in round 1, and LAFC has just absolutely owned that matchup when it's come to knockout matchups and playoff history. So, this is the 3rd straight year these teams are going to be meeting in the playoffs. And as far as the regular season this year, actually, the Whitecaps made up a little bit of ground in the sense of getting that respect in this rivalry or whatever you want to call it, because they came back from 2-0 down at home to tie it 2-2, and then also won on the road 1-0 at LAFC this season. So they have the one up at least this season on LAFC, but this is going to be a really, really fun matchup. LAFC, of course, as we know, not full strength because they've lost players, and especially players on that back line throughout the season, and also, of course, Igor Jesus, that defensive mid. But they've been already knowing that and without those players for so long now, but they've still been able to keep up the pace, and they used their extra games in hand at the end of the regular season to really just run the table for the most part and get themselves in a pretty good position seeding-wise. So we know what they are, Bawanga, Sun. We'll see who's going to start up top and how this front 3 kind of fluctuates, because Ordaz has kind of put in some good shifts, and it seems like Martinez has really fallen out of the favor just due to having to fit Sun in there and, just tinkering with the lineup. But this is just going to be a really, really good matchup on paper. And can the Whitecaps finally avenge those losses from the previous years and actually, mark themselves as a contender, move on to the conference final? They're hosting this one here. They were one of the best teams as far as in the West of getting home points, and LAFC was no cupcake to beat really when they were on the road either. In previous years, they were really, really poor. This year, a lot of draws, but also a considerable amount of wins, and so there are no pushovers away from BMO. There's also that extra motivation in a sense for LAFC to achieve something, win a title this year, since it's Steve Cherundolo's last season officially. That was announced earlier this season, and he'll be leaving LAFC after these playoffs. And so he'd love to go out on a bang, and this team would with him at the helm. But he's had a history in a little bit of a sense of choking in finals. Of course, they lost to the Crew a couple of years back, and just hasn't. Obviously, LAFC being the brand it is and the team it is since they entered, they are always expected to lift some sort of trophy and at least make it to MLS Cup, the final. So This is an important game just because they are the lower seed doesn't really mean they're the underdog, I would say, at least in their minds and expectations wise, because Vancouver is the one that, although this is a historic season for them, they made it to the CCC final, they are still kind of unproven, and we'll see if Müller can push them over the line. Ryan Gauld also returned and has been playing, so this should just be the best display from both teams. At the end of the day, we have to pick a winner who I think will advance, and I see these two teams being neck and neck. But I think we're going to get goals in this one. I think both teams should be firing, and I think it'll go extra time, maybe even penalties. And in that case, I think I have to give the edge to Vancouver just because they're at home, just because they've already played in a final this year. They've hopefully, I would say, for their sake, learned from that. And they've had just way more playoff experience getting deep through the Champions Cup earlier on in the season. So I think fully fit now, this group will take advantage. And although LAFC has its own firepower, I think Vancouver has the pieces to exploit what is a weakened backline that has stepped up, but will falter, in my opinion, in this matchup. So I say Vancouver advances, probably through extra time or penalties. Moving on to Sunday, we have both Eastern Conference semifinals on this day, and the first of those being the other 2 versus 3 seed matchup in the playoffs, and it's Cincinnati taking on Miami. Now, although these teams have had a lot of matchups in the past couple of years since Messi joined, still no playoff head-to-heads between these two teams ever. And this is going to be the first matchup. Obviously, this is a one-off game, and it's going to be in Cincy due to that final day decision day performance. Cincy and Miami were in these exact same seeds. Both of them won, and that's all Cincy had to do, and they held on. So this is that crucial moment here that should give them the edge, right? That is exactly what they wanted. And, since Messi has joined MLS, Cincinnati's actually gotten the better of Miami. There have not been many draws in this matchup. Cincy's won 3 of the 5 matchups. Miami's won 1, and then just the 1 draw. And most of them have been really, really lopsided towards whoever has won. So, and then back in the 2023 U.S. Open Cup semifinals, basically right at the start of Messi's tenure there, Miami won in PKs. Miami would eventually lose in the final to Houston. As for the injury news, really nothing changing for Miami. No real new injuries of note. This lineup has pretty much been set in stone for the last couple of months now. It's really been Allende getting in over Segovia, and this team has just really been a lot more balanced in a sense, just especially in that midfield. And although, yes, they are prone to leaking in goals sometimes, I don't think it's been as bad as last season. Now, going on the road, that's going to be amplified, like another issue for them. But also for Cincy, Miazga, he's kind of been dealing with a knock for some time now, and he's still doubtful. And then Echenike, who's been a real good surprise story at right wing back, picked up a knock on international break. So it would probably be Orejano getting in there anyways, or flip-flopping a little bit. And they are kind of spoiled in that department, so it's not too big of a loss. But he is a really fast and good on the ball when it comes to that overlapping and being a danger. So honestly, we're really getting treated to some great matchups in these conference semifinals or the overall quarterfinals, and it's really hard to call most of these games because these are exactly almost who you would expect to progress this far, and now it's really going to take some special moments, it feels like, to separate these two teams. But it just seems like Cincy has been over-reliant, in my opinion, on the star power this season, and it hasn't been all that convincing throughout the whole period of the year. I know they're the 2 seed, but they've had moments where they've really struggled to score goals and really put actual pressure on teams, be direct enough without having to just feed Evander or feed Denke, and the rest of this group hasn't really taken on those moments when those players are a little bit taken out of the game or targeted. And I feel like if Miami can successfully do that, then they have a really good chance to steal this game on the road, being the lower seed. And I think this is Miami's time to at least advance to the MLS Cup final. I think they eventually will. I think they get that done. And it continues here. Yes, they have to go on the road and then eventually or potentially a matchup in Philly in the conference final. But I just think Miami is a little bit more balanced. Messi has been, I know they just played Nashville like 4 times in a row, including the decision day. So that is padding everyone's stats a little bit because they've just absolutely owned Nashville, right? But I think this team has learned from that massive disappointment from last year, and we're going to see a bit of a redemption story continue here and have them go much, much deeper than, of course, last season's first round exit. So I think Cincinnati is going to falter just due to that lack of team balance, I feel like. And the moments will be won by Messi and the other stars on this Miami team. So I think they get it done and win in normal time. Next up, it's the other Eastern Conference semifinal between the 1 and 5 seed Philly taking on NYC. Pretty much one of a rivalry, a natural rivalry due to the proximity, and NYC being the only team to cause an upset in the first round. So they're the only non-top 4 seed remaining between both conferences, and they're here to try and continue another crazy run. They just seem to be so consistent despite what seed they are advancing in the playoffs. And when they did end up winning MLS Cup, they were, not one of the top seeds in that sense. And they're kind of used to that as a franchise or whatever, as a club, just still making waves in the playoffs, advancing through ugly means, but regardless, getting it done. And this season, each of these teams split the season series 1-1. And other playoff history, they met in back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals. The 2021 was when NYC eventually won MLS Cup. 2022, when the Union won, they would go on to lose to LAFC in the final. So for the Union, no new injuries or changes really. And for NYC, unfortunately, they're going to be without really important players, including key striker Alonso Martinez, who's been bagging in the goals. He single-handedly won them the first game out of the best of 3 in Charlotte, and then obviously has just been such an important piece and goal-scoring presence that has carried this team throughout the year. He's been the one consistent scorer. And then you also have Perea and O'Neal, 2 important pieces in that starting midfield, out due to separate reasons. Perea dealing with the leg injury, and then O'Neal, he got a yellow card in every one of those 3 games in the best of 3, so he's been suspended due to that accumulation. And so honestly, to me, despite what NYC's done, defeating Charlotte and beating them twice in Charlotte, which is of course already an insane road environment to go into and one of the hardest to win at, despite all that impressive work, I think this has to be, on paper, one of the most straightforward of the 4 matchups in terms of predicting, because the Union just dealing with no injuries. Quinn Sullivan's been out for some time now, but they've adjusted that lineup, and this roster and this lineup is just so solid right now that NYC coming in here, I just don't see the goal scoring threat. They're going to try and make this a low scoring game, in my opinion, keep things grimy. But Philly at the other end is one of the best defensive teams in the league, and that's a big reason as to why they won the Supporters' Shield. So, this break between rounds of the playoffs, this 2-week break now, can make things a little, weird as far as we might see some upsets or some teams not really feel that full flow of chemistry right away. Like maybe it'll take 20, 30 minutes to start some of these games and get that team chemistry back or whatnot and get into the flow of the rhythms of how they play. But yeah, the Union, I think, should just overpower this NYC team. I think they get it done, maybe not easily, but maybe not, it's going to look ugly, I feel like, but on the score sheet, it's going to look more convincing than maybe it might feel, just because of how NYC will approach this game, in my opinion. But I still think they will find the goals. They have the talent, they have the depth, if things aren't going right, to sub in a couple of strikers or attacking players and change the game. And so I think they win this one something like 2-0 in regular time. And despite what NYC's done, it's gonna go for naught here. They've caused one upset, but this is, I think, too far beyond them, especially with considering everyone that's out. If Martinez was in, he could cause a lot of damage and score an early goal or something like that. But this just seems too far overmatched for NYC. The final of the 4 conference semifinals, we go back to the West. Will be on Monday, November 24th, and it's San Diego hosting Minnesota, the 1-4 seed in the West. San Diego took 3 games to defeat the Timbers after choking a late lead in game 2 and then eventually just completely self-destructing in that penalty shootout, but then just flew by the Timbers in game 3 right back at home. And then meanwhile, Minnesota defeating the Sounders 2-1 using 2 penalty shootouts for their 2 wins, both at home. Meanwhile, they were down in that third match with a red card and even took the lead before a late equalizer by the Sounders. But this year's goalkeeper of the year, of course, St. Clair, putting on a show and once again proving the difference in the penalty shootout. If it's not the defense, stepping up to make plays due to this system they have, the counterattacking that allows a lot of pressure. If they're not the one stopping things, he is that final line of defense, and he has been rock solid all season long. So once again, they advanced last season to the second round after beating RSL in a couple of penalty shootouts. And they are just, this group with Eric Ramsey has just been using that experience here to feel confident in these kind of close, tight playoff games and just continue to have that mentality to win ugly, right? They are a counterattacking team. They are the most aggressive set piece team in maybe not just MLS, but most leagues, in the world. And they just have success with these type of tactics. And they can still even play beautiful, football once everyone is healthy. Of course, they lost Oluwase, was a big loss, but Yeboah's come back now after being out through the end of the regular season. And he should be, a bona fide starter here. And they still have really good threats to score and a lot of height, of course, which is why they're so successful on set pieces and long throw-ins and all of that. So, of course, this is San Diego's first inaugural season, so there's no playoff matchups history. But this season, each team won one of the 2 matches they played. So they split 1-1, and each team won on the road. So that's an interesting, bit of info there. And then Minnesota, of course, before last year, they had never advanced out of the first round. They did last year and then lost in the second round. So here they are again in the second round, and they've never reached the West Final. So can they go one step further in this now next year under Ramsey? It's going to be a tough ask because San Diego, of course, essentially the best modern expansion team, inaugural season, in modern times. And they've already gone one step further than St. Louis, because St. Louis was the number 1 seed and then choked to their rivals Kansas City in the first round, best of 3. So San Diego has kind of avoided that hiccup. And here, of course, they're going to have home field advantage for as long as they are in these playoffs. So that's a big, big, important thing to have, especially when we know that these two styles are so conflicting And San Diego is going to be putting so much pressure and waves of pressure against Minnesota's, set up shape block. And it's really just about who can execute, right? And a big part of why San Diego might have trouble is due to recent injury news, which is that Chucky Lozano, of course, one of the star players outside of Dreyer, on the other wing, picked up a needless knock playing in international friendlies with Mexico just this past week during the international break, which is why we've had this 2 week part of why we've had this 2 week break between the end of the first round and now. And so his status is in major doubt. Now, he has been coming off the bench anyways, because he's been dealing with knocks anyways previously towards the end of the season, and he's just a bit injury prone, but he's been a bit of a super sub. So not to say that it's devastating news if he can't play, because he hasn't really been starting, but regardless, it's an important option to have. And really anyone on the San Diego team can find themselves in scoring positions due to the way this, attack kind of fluctuates its shape and it's almost positionless. But having that quality, of course, in those positions is really, really important when it comes to these important games where a few moments or phases can decide the outcome. So also, Dos Santos, the starting keeper, he's 50-50 after suffering, I think it was a head injury before last game. He didn't play in game 3. But regardless, Cisniega would start there. If anything, they've kind of had a bit of a 50-50 as far as the starts this year, it feels like. So, it's not a completely, detrimental thing as well for them. On Minnesota side, Rosales, of course, a very important left back. He's suspended because he got that red card early on in the game against the Sounders. Obviously, the Loons still were able to come back and win in penalties on the game 3, but this is an important loss for them because, of course, it, takes that type of creativity and that overlapping presence when they do get on their counterattacks, and a guy who can send in, crosses and things like that. And so we're going to see how they can adjust there. But once again, it's a very tight game on paper. They've split the regular season series, and it's really just about who you can trust to really take control of this game early, and whether Minnesota will feel comfortable on the road again, trying to handle things. Because when they went to the Sounders in game 2, yes, they kind of made an attempted comeback after going down, I think it was 3-0. But, they never really go out of games, but still they're definitely a bit more leaky on the road. And so it's just about preserving that shape and not getting too rattled too early into the match. I think a prediction is probably the hardest of the 4 in this one, just due to these conflicting styles. And San Diego's just wild card nature, because not many people even expected this team to make the playoffs preseason. I had them just outside of it in that preview video of the season, but this roster has just truly come to fruition and been just such a joy to watch, as far as pushing the standards of what an MLS team can look like on the field. And so despite Minnesota, of course, having that just experience as a club existing and having a couple more, a year and a half or so more under their belt in this style and the system with Ramsey, and the previous playoff experience, I want to say that will matter. And in certain phases of the game, I think it will. But I think San Diego is just breaking all boundaries and rules of what we can expect of not just an expansion team, but an MLS team, like I said. And so I just think at home, especially, they're going to maintain this form. Just puts too much pressure on Minnesota that they will eventually break. And I'm not sure how deep this game goes, where it ends, but I think San Diego just about squeezes through and continues to make that history and challenge for even closer to an MLS Cup in their first season. And so I think we'll get a 1-2 in the West, San Diego versus the Whitecaps. And then in the East, we'll get a 1-3 with Philly hosting Miami, with Miami, I guess, being the only upset in my opinion. As far as the seeds go, however you want to, look at it outside of the seeds is subjective, but as far as the seeds go, I think Miami will be the only upset. And regardless, these are four very intriguing matchups for the conference semifinals, and I think the level is just continues to get higher and higher, and all of these teams I think deserve to be in these positions, and I think we're just going to have some really fun games and moments, and we'll see what happens. But best of luck to all teams, and I hope you guys enjoy watching all these matches. Let me know what your predictions are for the conference semifinals in the comments down below. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys next time ahead of the next round of the playoffs.